Okay. Um, Hi, everyone, and everyone who's potentially listening. This is a very kind of spontaneous project, or like I was thinking about doing some sort of podcast, but I didn't really have a clear outline how it's going to go, or what to do exactly. But I just knew I want to talk to people that I find inspiring and that can share about topics that we all are interested in. So I know Amy from, I think, I don't know, 2020 or 2021. We found each other on Instagram, and she's a contortion coach and an artist. And I've taken classes with her, and we also collaborated doing kind of sort of a workshop or intensive series together where I bring the physio side into it, more like anatomy, physiology, nerdy stuff. And Amy does the actual contortion coaching. And we've been nerding out about stuff constantly since we met. And Tamara, I met this October in Mysore. And we realized after chatting for a few times over chai and idli that we are also both very into nerding out about stuff. And I actually forgot how long you've been doing Ashtanga yoga, but both of us have a very long history doing Ashtanga, and we are both also always interested in how to take learnings from other disciplines into that too. So correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, that's like the outline of who we are.
So during a whole 2 hours, we actually forgot to ever mention where people can find us online. So I'm just gonna let you know that on Instagram, Amy is at missinkblot, Tamara is at yoga_Tamara, and I am at niftyfox. So yeah, please find us if you actually want to take part in this conversation and engage with us. I have also put up the names on the screen for spelling. And that leads to another side note that this podcast is actually meant to be a visual podcast. So most of it you can just listen to, but there are some instances where it makes sense to look at your screen because we're demoing some movements and such. So have fun.
Amy and Tamara don't know each other. They are seeing each other for the first time today. But I basically, the topic of bandhas is something that we all are aware of. So Amy, before she started contortion, she actually did a little bit of Ashtanga yoga. And I think that's when you picked up about the concept of bandhas, probably. Um, but basically, bandha is this thing that a lot of people talk about, and a lot of people have different opinions about, and there's different layers of how to understand bandhas. So there's more of like this spiritual, energetic, philosophical side of bandha, trying to contain your basically life force or prana. And then there's also the physical layer of like, do I use certain muscles? How do I use them? Where are they located? How intensely should I contract them? Should I contract them at all? Um, yeah, and also different body positions use them differently in a way. So we want to go through the whole topic, starting with a bit of a historical and philosophical input by Tamara, because she is very well versed in that. And also, just as a little bit of a thing, like we are very aware that none of us are of Indian heritage, and it's important to generally center voices of that heritage in discussions about, for example, bandhas and yoga. And I do want to do that in the future, but this today, like this triangular constellation, is just kind of what happened organically. So yeah, we're starting with that. So Tamara, if you want to, you can start.
Thank you. Yes, you, Tanya, mentioned Bandha is something that in modern postural yoga has very different opinions on, especially within the Ashtanga Vinyasa tradition. It's something that is part and parcel of this tradition, but over the 11 years that I've been practicing this system, I've came across many different opinions on Bandha, from like one extreme to another extreme, from people saying like, teachers saying like, don't bother about them. It's not what you think. It's not the pelvic floor contraction. So just leave it. And another extreme would be like, yes, everything depends on the bandha. If you don't do it, if you can't do some asana, if you cannot do some transition, that basically means you do not apply bandha correctly. And it kind of became an easy escape to explain why you can't do something just because your bandha is not correct. So it's kind of can be a bit confusing and frustrating, this part of the practice, to gain some clarity on what exactly it is. And I think it's really important to understand the historical and philosophical background of these techniques, because they kind of bring everything into a broader perspective, so you can appreciate the technique as it was initially designed, and the purpose of it initially, and how it was transformed with time, and how it was reinterpreted, and that it's okay that it was transforming and being reinterpreted, because like it's not static. The whole tradition is evolving and changing, right? And the techniques started to be seen in different lights and from different angles. So as you already mentioned, the bandha is just. I wanted to mention one thing, that it's well known that Patabi Joyce was very insistent on the correct method, right? The correct method of the practice. And he would describe the correct method of the practice as vinyasa, rechaka, puraka, which is exhalation, inhalation, drishti, gazel point, dhyana, kind of mental focus, and bandha. So that was like that important part. And it's bandha is what is also considered to be the pillar of the so-called Tristana method, which again stands for asana itself within the vinyasa framework, drishti, gazel points, and the breathing in a specific way with sound and with bandha. So as you mentioned already, originally bandha is about the subtle work, subtle energy work. So what does that mean? If we look at the word itself, bandha, it's worth looking at the term itself and see what's the meaning of it. Bandha translates as a lock, something that is locking or kind of restraint or binding. And a very common analogy would be like a dam that restricts the river flow and to collect water, right? So that's the bandha is this kind of dam that restricts. And restricts what? It restricts the subtle energy that is moving in one direction, and we want to make it move in a different direction, right? So way back in the ancient times, right, as early as the 12th, 13th century, maybe even earlier, the bandhas were described as a separate practice, as a mudra. It's actually a mudra practice that stands for the like yogic seal, sealing that subtle energy within the subtle body. And here we come to another big topic about what is it, the subtle body, and is that kind of the understanding of the body not as purely physical, but also subtle, with its own channels and nadis and vital energies. And those vital energies, they flow along those channels. And not going too deep into the details, just mention that basically out of those energies, many energies, 10, 5 principle, and 2, the most talked about is Prana and Apana. as Prana and Apana. And it's believed that Apana is moving downward, and it's like leaving our body in a downward direction. And that is the cause of the decay and sickness and basically loss of vital energy. So there come to be a moment when this technique originated as a method to redirect this loss of downward moving apana and make it go up towards to meet another energy called prana. So that's kind of that whole point of the bandha, is to restrict the downward loss of apana, to catch it and to make it go up towards the navel center, join with prana, and then both of them like channel up through the sushumna, the central channel, up towards the head. And the results of such practices were described as from more down to earth, like staying young, preserving youth, to more lofty ones like Samadhi, the Kundalini awakening, the achievement of Samadhi, the state of deep meditational absorption. So basically the bandhas we're talking about are three bandhas: the Mula bandha, Uddiyana bandha, and Jalandhara bandha. Jalandhara bandha is not so much talked about. It's the most focus, the most attention is on Uddiyana and Mula, right? I think we're going to talk mostly about these two, right? But I will mention a few words on Jalandhara as well. Huh?
You will see Jalandhara, so the neck actually in contortion with Amy, it's very, very vital.
Oh,
And
Yeah, I can yes, I can imagine it's like that deep neck flexors, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
the Fila
yeah.
Bandha connects to Mula Bandha. So in contortion, we work mostly from the neck and the root lock to connect the whole. So the abdominal lock is secondary almost, but this two are the most important for sure.
So
Uh,
yeah, it's we'll yeah, you will elaborate on this a little bit later. So how exactly it was done, how those techniques were described in a physical way, the mechanics of them, how were they described? Mula bandha, mula means root, so it's that the root lock, right? Uh, in the literature of the medieval times, it was described as pressing of the heel into the perineum. You hear me?
yeah. But what the first word, like the
Pressing,
pressing,
pressing. Yeah, pressing. Sorry, pressing. Yes, it's like pressing of the heel of one leg on a left leg or the right leg into the perineum, and contraction of the rectum, and then moving the apana up like this towards the navel center. And the Uddiyana, which Uddiyana translates as the upward, flying upward, is described as the moving the whole of the abdomen be above and below the navel, up, back and up towards the spine. So like that. And Jalandhara bandha, which means like also Jala means water, so like kind of restricting the flow of bindu from the head, another subtle energy. That would be described as the chin pressing towards the chest. So it's kind of sealing from the top and then from the bottom. And as already you mentioned earlier as well, that bandhas can be understood on different levels, like there are layers to it, and they're like a purely physical one is that the muscular contractions. But that's not the goal in itself. The goal is actually energetic, like that energetic layer to it, traditionally speaking. That's was all about there is always it is all about the energy manipulation to preserve it in the subtle body, to direct it towards towards the head, right? Yeah, so when the bandhas were taught like that originally, and then we have the very well-known figure, Tirumalai Krishnamacharya, who was the teacher of Patabi Joyce. Prior to him, it was not known to be taught. Bandha was not known to be taught as an asana, as part of asana. It was always a separate technique, done separately. As a mudra, so you sit down and you do it. It was not part of asana, not to mention dynamic practice like jumping back, jumping through, some drop backs, kind of. No, it was not part of the asana practice. But Krishnamacharya, he was a great innovator in a way. He was um, uh, developing a lot the physical yoga practice. So he started to mention bandha while in the asana. So if we look at a few works written by him, a few books, as well as his commentary on Hatha Pradipika, there is a very interesting book with his commentaries. We see that for example, he's recommending to try Mula Bandha in headstand first before trying it in seated position. So just, I guess, to give an idea of that, pulling up while you're upside down, the gravity facilitates that feeling. So yeah, among other things, I made a few notes. I was looking at the books the other day. And he also mentions, for example, trying Uddiyana Bandha first in Tadagi Mudra. And Tadagi Mudra is just lying flat on the back. So basically in the supine position, you pull in the belly in. Also, I guess it's just easier because you don't have to work so much against the gravity. So it's easier to do it while lying down on the back. And he was also, there was the he started to recommend bandha in some of the asana descriptions and mentioning some therapeutic effects as well. For example, one interesting thing I found in one of his book was the recommendation of doing Mula Bandha in asanas such as Baddha Konasana and Upavishta Konasana if you have pain while in menstruation. So that would help alleviate some pain while doing these asanas with Mula Bandha. So that's
because that would be very, like anti whatever is being said, or just during the rest of the month when you're not.
No, actually, he said if you have the pain, the menstrual pain, the menstrual cramps, do this bandha. It was, if you want, I will find you the quote. He said that generally speaking, the asana should be avoided while menstruation, during menstruation. But if you have menstrual pain, a woman can do Mula Bandha in Baddha Konasana and Upavishta Konasana to alleviate pain. Upavishta, I think it's not the B, I think it's the seated one, the legs on the floor.
Yeah.
Not the up one, but
Also, I would say that generally practicing contortion or flexibility when you're on your period generally decreases menstrual cramps. So that's never really an issue.
yeah,
Yeah.
so he was quite right. Yeah, so it's there are a few interesting comments about bandha within the asana, while also like advocating for some therapeutic effects. And for example, he also says that in which one? Salamba Sarvangasana, both Uddiyana and Mula Bandha can be practiced. And actually to get the three of them, Jalandhara as well, because it's the position already does it. And then we have, after Krishnamacharya, we have his student Patabi Joyce, who integrated bandha even further, and it became like part and parcel of the asana practice. But then it somewhat strange and that I can't really fully agree on, that often it started to be taught like that bandha should be applied all the time throughout the practice. Like you stand on your mat, you apply Mula Uddiyana, and then you release it only when you come down into Shavasana. It doesn't really sound realistic. And if it's really done physically, maybe only if you like hold the mental awareness there, yes, like you can constantly come back mentally to the region of where the Mula and Uddiyana reside, but constantly holding it, physically contracting, I'm not sure. So that's just my experience of it. And also, if we look at the what Patabi Joyce mentioned in his book Yoga Mala, he doesn't really says that Mula Bandha should be applied in all asanas. And there are a few examples where he says that in this asana, there should be no Mula. And if for the curious, whoever watches it and has the book, it's interesting to, and who practice Ashtanga, it's interesting to, from time to time, to go back to this little book because it's quite insightful. And you realize that it's the bandha application is not just squeeze and contract the whole practice. It's much more elaborate and much more, I think, you've got to discriminate where it's useful and where it's not, because that was Patabi Joyce himself who would say, like, in this pose, release Mula, or like only Uddiyana or no Uddiyana, something like that. There are only a few examples, but still they are there, and that means something, right?
Yeah, I can add on a bit to just something you said a bit earlier about how the bandhas, you mentioned like going to Shavasana, you were also holding the bandha. But
No,
I
in
can
Shavasana, no.
no, I mean when you're descending down into it, like when you're transitioning. But in a lot of contortion poses, what keeps you safe is actually connecting your Jalabandha with your Mula Bandha to return to neutral so that you are not dissipating the energy, because that kind of violent with like opening of your, if you release the bandhas too early, it would be like a rubber band and it would like spring and all the energy would dissipate. So I can see like the application of it in a transition back to neutral, which is kind of what Shavasana is actually. It's just a neutral position.
Samasthiti, you mean?
Oh, okay. No, I thought you meant
So,
like at the end of practice, you go down and lie on the practice and you kind of have,
yeah.
you mentioned, yeah.
Yeah. This I meant Shavasana. So you mean
Okay.
that like not really releasing it all of a sudden, but
Yeah,
kind of
but
continue
pulling the body
holding
back to neutral and kind of pulling
before
the
you
energy
come.
back
Okay.
into neutral. Yeah. So,
Mm.
yeah. So that's, and also kind of tying into what you said about it's not always connected. It depends on what the pulse, what's happening anatomically in terms of closing the energy or opening out the energy from the pelvis as well. So there's some subtleties that connect to contortion practice, but more in a more practical manner. Yeah.
I would just mention one thing, and I think Tanya, you would probably elaborate on this more. It's also like maybe it's a small detail that is not even like worth paying attention to, but I found it quite curious that as I was introduced to the bandha concept within the Ashtanga practice and how it was taught, is that Mula is the pelvic floor contraction, right? The pelvic floor activation. And Uddiyana is the lower ab, is like that, not that Uddiyana, that suction, but like lower ab. So Mula would be just about pelvic floor, and Uddiyana would be about the lower abs. But again, looking through different literature, I came across the description by Krishnamacharya, who said that Mula is both the pelvic floor and lower abs. And he quoted Hatha Pradipika, but actually in Hatha Pradipika doesn't say so. Hatha Pradipika says Mula is the pressing of the heel into perineum and contraction of the rectum. And Uddiyana is the full abdomen drawing back. But another text, which is a bit later, text on Grande Samhita, it does say that Mula Bandha stands for both pelvic floor perineum and lower abs together. And to me, it makes more sense that those two areas are kind of
Yeah, I agree.
connected.
It's
And
hard to separate the two.
yes, and on a few occasions, Krishnamacharya said that Mula is uh, the perineum and the lower ab drawing back. So that would stand for Mula. And Uddiyana is that the whole abdomen, which is like the we think about it as the abdominal, but it's what is drawing the abdominal back and up, especially as we breathe, an inhalation pattern and exhalation, but exhalation probably not so much. Inhalation mostly is the rib cage, the action of the rib cage, the ribs and the diaphragm that is expanding our ribs up, and the belly kind of goes. There is that sense of lift, especially if you hold Mula at that time, right? So that's one curious detail that kind of made me rethink the what I call what. So to me now, the Mula Bandha is that area of the lower ab and the pelvic floor, which is hard to separate. And so it's a kind of for me it makes sense like that. And the Uddiyana is more action of the rib cage, of the ribs expansion that makes that kind of lifting up
Yeah, I can
of
add on to
the
that a little
entire
bit as well, because
abdomen up.
the abdominal lock is very important for contortion, but it has to originate from the root lock, obviously, because the energy has to center in the pelvis and move upwards. But for back bending, especially from the lower back, that feeling of the suction in, and this is the cue that I use a lot, is the aliens cue of the aliens traveling from your pelvis up your front body. So it's very important to kind of tuck to extend the six pack abs, so the rectus abdominis, with the obliques. And that's, for me, that's how the abdominal lock works. So in some, for example, in a position like cobra, but more like flying cobra, that needs to be that really strong suction from the pelvis up the front body to the ribs. And this is also what prevents the ribs from flaring, is that suction in to elongate the front body. And for me, that's what the abdominal lock is. And the neck lock and the pelvic lock connect. The two strips is kind of like a bow. So like two anchors and then the strip. But the abdominal lock is kind of elongating from those two center points. And that it's also very important because usually what I see the most is like, in a cobra position, like all the energy is dissipating through the stomach because people are crunching in the mid and lower back. And that suction from the abdominal lock is very important to tuck to elongate the front so that you can actually get to your hips. So you're balancing from your hips and not from your back.
It's
Yeah.
interesting how that it's a it's a good example how that the technique of Mula Bandha got like reinterpreted and repurposed within the contortion training. The action is like that the same. It's probably mental imagery is different, right? We're not talking about Apana and Prana anymore here, but
In a
the
way, we
application
are
of
kind of as
the
well. Yeah. Because
yeah, but the
we are kind
mechanics
of,
are
yeah, in a sense. Because in the end of the day, the muscular engagement is not only muscular engagement, it's kind of whole body engagement. And the idea in bandhas of like retaining your energy is
yeah.
very prevalent in contortion. So, for example, I'll talk about this later in terms of specific back bending, but we're always trying to contain the energy so we can elongate from the front body because back bending is more about front body elongation. So a lot of it is energetic. So the way I cue it and the way I coach flexibility is on energetic terms. That's why it kind of resonates with me because this is how I was teaching from a while ago. And if you look at the fascia lines, I would mention this in the chat, but the meridians, or like in Chinese medicine, the meridians correlate. There are some studies that show that it correlates to fascia lines, and fascia lines is what we work with when we're moving, when we're doing things in movement. So I'm thinking that a lot of these traditions of different, like Indian tradition, Chinese tradition, and then of course like just how we do circus, a lot of these we're talking about the same things but using kind of a different language, but I think that it is complementary. Like the also talking when we're working the physical body, we're also working the energetic body. And when you talked about meditation earlier on, or the bandhas and how they work in meditation, the first thought I had is that the very basic meditation where you're grounding into the root of the earth and the energy is traveling all the way up to your tra crown chakra and then dissipating to the top. This is also very common um, magical practice in terms of the subtle body, in terms of re getting energy back to the earth, but it also correlates to contortion because a lot of and flexibility because a lot of the engagement in your root lock and how the energy travels up is by grounding into the floor and pulling energy from the earth up, if that makes sense, all the way up to the head. So there's like
Yeah, yeah,
correlations between all these
I
traditions.
agree that like the physical and energetic is hard to like separate. Obviously, you work with the body, you affect its energies, but the higher goal is not exactly the same, right? In contortion, the goal is to achieve certain shape of the certain
I wouldn't say so because
position. It's
contortion is
not
an
really
art form.
like
Yeah.
samadhi, right? The goal
No,
of
because
contortion is not
no,
is
contortion is
not
more of an
samadhi.
artistic form. So all
Yes.
artistic form, I would argue, is kind of spiritual in a way
Yeah, so
because you're expressing the body.
it's not
Here,
not to diminish, it's just that like to look at the what was it was how it was described in the medieval literature when the bandhas were taught, and it became the pretty much the defining feature of the hatha yoga, the mudras, of which these three bandhas are a part of. This Mula bandha, Jalandhara bandha, and Uddiyana bandha are a kind of a part of a mudra practice or subtype of mudra practice, and they like that. Um, the results and the goals were to transcend death, achieve samadhi. So kind of lofty ideas, but also like to become youthful. So I guess
Yes, go ahead. And yeah.
being flexible is one of them as well.
because of the lag of on my end, it was hard to kind of go in, but I feel like I'm kind of in the middle between you two. So I have done a bunch of Ashtanga and Ashtanga only from 2012. And then for 7 years, I just did Ashtanga and I was really into it and thinking about all these concepts and also looking at Yoga Mala, seeing which asanas I should engage, which I shouldn't, etc. It's a subtle thing, subtle body, all, like trying to understand it from that point, and also the eight limb path of Ashtanga yoga, trying to reach Samadhi or like apply everything until you are in the state of Samadhi. And then I actually stopped doing Ashtanga yoga like completely for 5 years. And in those 5 years, I discovered calisthenics, handstands, contortion, and all that stuff. And then I did have a feeling like a lot of the things were familiar. It reminded me a lot of Ashtanga. And from Ashtanga, I also came with that background that it's just a practice, like you do it forever. It's not like if one day is bad, the whole thing is bad. But there was always a subtle thing that was kind of not really in there when I did my training. And it was something that I could just achieve when I was practicing Ashtanga yoga. And then when I started
Mhm.
practicing Ashtanga yoga again, it was very interesting to like reconnect to that, but now I had it as a parallel discipline to other disciplines. So just for those who don't know me, who are listening, I mostly currently do like a bit of weightlifting, a bit of Ashtanga yoga, like in the physical form, and a bit of pole dance. And also I did, of course, some contortion. And I can say that like going back to the points that were brought up by you guys before, I do feel that the subtle effects of the bandhas, they are taking place if you train contortion in the style that Amy does. They are taking place, but people are not really coming to contortion practice with the goals that Ashtanga yogis come to Ashtanga yoga, or that they figure out while they're practicing that there's this thing like the whole. Basically, I feel like in Ashtanga yoga, you do kind of absorb that whole framework of the history, the philosophy, everything, and then you're with like a conscious mind trying to apply these things, and you're kind of very attuned to harvesting the benefits of it. So of the subtle energy that they can give you, not just like on the gross body level. But when you do it in contortion, at least in the way that Amy teaches, you will have the effects of it, but you're not really maybe fully aware that you are getting them. But the common, yeah, I can let you speak in a bit, Amy. So a common thing that I notice is if you don't apply it during your contortion training, you can actually leave feeling very depleted and exhausted, and like your life force is dropping. And then also there's a common experience that people who maybe sloppily start contortion and they don't have a coach, or they have a coach that is not really with their mind connected to that area of that you can even use bandha in contortion. And then they come to Amy, they start noticing that they don't feel as depleted, right, from the contortion training, or like they feel like they have more like a subtle connection to something, but we don't really see the whole framework in contortion of what we know in Ashtanga yoga, all the philosophical discussion and the history of that. So it's, you know what I mean? I'm trying to say, like, you still have an unarticulated, non-verbal experience of it, of the subtle energies. Versus in Ashtanga, you kind of have words for it, and you're looking to seek that and like find it. Okay, so now.
Yeah, but even like in Ashtanga, not like I'm not sure like people who practice Ashtanga necessarily bother about these energies, because that's something I mean, like, for example, I'm not telling that my goal within the practice of Ashtanga sequence is to achieve Samadhi. That I don't, um, that's the, uh, quite difficult. It's difficult to put the finger on it, what I want to say. But for many people who practice Ashtanga now, is the goal is to also just to develop the body, develop the strength, develop the flexibility, develop the mental focus, to learn certain tricks, certain asanas, and they use bandha, and as the teacher explains them, to help with achieve this achievement, that to help with backbends, to help with those jump back, jump through, to help like all the fluidity and flowiness in the practice, not necessarily to join Apana with Prana. I'm,
But they
I'm not, I'm not
are.
and bring them into the navel center and then awaken the Kundalini stuff. So that the purpose gets a little bit different. And it's not a bad thing. It's just what is relative to this person and to us in the given moment in the practice and in life. So it's not
Yeah,
necessarily everyone is interested about this metaphysical thing.
I can also add on because originally, or the school of contortion that I came from is more Mongolian contortion, and Mongolian contortion has its same originations as Ashtanga in a way, as a very religious practice. The only difference is that a lot of the texts and there's no text. So like in yogic tradition, you do have a lot of text that you can refer to that establishes and clarifies what these concepts mean. Whereas Mongolian contortion and the origin of Mongolian contortion, it's very religious, it's Buddhistic, but all of it's verbal, it's transmitted verbally and orally as our tradition. And it's also a nomadic culture. So a lot of Mongolian tradition, contortion is from Mongolian tradition. And if you trained with the more traditional coaches, so the ones who kind of brought Mongolian contortion to North America, like Sushma Byamba. She does emphasize a lot of the cultural, the more religious aspects in a way that contortion comes from. But it got changed, kind of very, very similar parallels to yoga, with, like British calisthenics influencing and military exercise influencing yoga. Russian acrobatics was what influenced contortion and brought hand balancing and a lot of those more acrobatic elements into Mongolian contortion. But Mongolian contortion has always been um, a way of achieving some kind of enlightenment state through imitating natural forms. So it's very similar in a way to yoga. So that's an interesting context because obviously there's different traditions of contortion, but the one that is most well known and the one that has kind of survived into modernity is Mongolian contortion. Yeah. So that's, oh yeah, and also this is just back to Tanya's point about the depletion of life force. I remember when you first do contortion or extreme flexibility, I think that's this feeling everyone can relate to of like being an over bent piece of rubber, like the feeling of becoming an old person. But knowing how to pull the energy back stops that. And I would also say like this is something that contortionists always talk about is this feeling of almost getting drunk from doing yoga. Like my students always mention one of my friends calls it like a contortion coma. Like you get into an altered state of mind from doing contortion is because we work on such a deep level to extend and pull back the energy. So for a lot of people, it kind of feels like you took drugs or something. That's a very common experience for contortion. I don't see this in any other discipline and circuits,
I
really.
can, yeah, like deep backbends, I think it's sometimes it feels like you.
And I do want to add to your point, Tamara, that I understand what you mean by like probably the majority of people who nowadays practice Ashtanga, they didn't originally come with the goal of achieving Samadhi. And maybe some of them discovered the scriptures and are like interested in it. And some maybe change their approach. But for some, it's just mostly maybe a physical thing, which is not a bad thing. Like I want to put that out there. And there are people who are kind of judgmental about people doing yoga for just, a physical aspect. But I'm really not the person who judges that because I do feel you still receive some benefits. And I do feel like, at least this is what I've observed from listening to podcasts and reading stuff about Ashtanga, that in general, people, if they stay in the practice, they notice that there are ways to practice where you're depleting your life force versus ways that you're not. And it is kind of related to how you're aware during the practice. If you try to have a single-minded focus, if you apply to have a good breath, a good drishti, and actually a good connection to your bandhas, and then you can walk away from a practice feeling like you really just all your life force dissipated, and you're like, wow, having a hard time going through the rest of your day. Versus you practice, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm walking through my day and feeling very light, and even though it was like the same practice from outside. So I do feel that if people are staying for the long run in the Ashtanga practice, they're at least like looking to not lose their life force. So they are, even if they're not trying to get to Samadhi, they're trying to figure out how to contain energy while kind of multiplying their energy levels, which is connected.
Yeah, it's about like more the whole setup of the practice comes down to not only the technique of Mula or Uddiyana bandha themselves, but sorry, something just popped up into my screen. Sorry. So it's not just about the specific techniques such as Mula or Dhyana bandha. It's overall how you practice the intensity, the volume, the frequency every day versus, I don't know, like not every day, every other day, 2 hours versus 1 hour, and also other factors like the way you eat, the way you sleep. So many things affect that cumulative effect on how you feel after you've done your practice. So that is, you can apply your Mula bandha throughout the practice, but still feel depleted. That can be other factors also playing the role. So yeah, of course, in the long term, you need to find a way that sustains you and that you enjoy the practice and you progress without getting depleted, and you feel they're actually energized after the practice. But I think it doesn't come down just to that Mula or Uddiyana bandha. It's just the kind of more broad perspective on managing your practice volume and intensity and frequency together with other life aspects like nutrition, sleep, and stuff like that.
I
Yeah.
do feel like for sure that, if you do Ashtanga yoga intensely, you kind of have to think and act as if you're an athlete in a way. So you have to do all those extra things. So yeah, I agree. It's definitely not only down to bandha, but I think it's it's a big aspect of the whole thing. And also bandha, if it's misunderstood, and at least that's my perspective, if you're constantly squeezing your pelvic floor and your abs hardcore during the practice, that will deplete you. So maybe because I'm looking at the structure that we had, so we have gone a little bit through the history and the philosophy and already kind of merged into parallels between Ashtanga and contortion. So I was thinking maybe if Amy has more of her part, like the parallels and differences between asana and contortion, do you want to have some inputs? You can do that now. And then maybe it's good to go later to like the anatomy and physiology of breathing and the pelvic floor and all that stuff, and kind of like maybe I can put in my perspective from learning about the physical body in that way, like in a very Western way, and merging it with those practices. And like then we can really go into the nitty gritty of how can you use bandha, like the physical aspect of it, without depleting you and actually serve. So Amy, do you have
Yeah, I can chime in. Well, the first thing is like I think it's wrong to separate like in terms of the physical with this kind of Western idea of if you or also in yogic among yogis of like uh kind of saying that, being more focusing more on the meditation or the spiritual aspect is more important than the physical aspect. Because I think like being able to integrate the physical as the sensory and the physical body is the medium in which we are on earth and in which we are transmitting energetic ideas. So this is a very I think this is something that's also very common across traditions, just using the body as a vehicle. So I mean, you can see this in kind of hyper spiritual people of like the complete separation of the spiritual body from the physical body. And in some very old yogic texts, it, that's an extreme example of completely leaving the earthly realm and existing as a subtle body, and like on like meditate like I'm sorry, levitation and all those crazy like very old ideas that you will encounter if you read really weird old yogic texts, which I did a bit. It's very funky. Anyway, going back to also like mentioning like what Tanya said about training Ashtanga is basically like being all these although in Ashtanga you have formalized these ideas into a specific structure, versus I think this is something that if you do physical activity and as an athlete, that you have to pay attention to your sleep and how you eat. All these things are very important factors in how your body functions. So I think like even if we don't formalize these terms, in a way maybe it's a good thing, because I think people get a bit uppity about it when it's formalized and like you have to tick all your boxes, but it's something that we know innately that it bleeds into physical practice. And in terms of contortion, I think there's a few things to clarify first in terms of what contortion is, though that's a very broad question. Um, because ultimately, contortion or backbending is it's a complicated thing, but a lot of it, or the way I teach it, is drawing from ideas from anatomy trains from Thomas Meyer and the fascia lines. Um, and the way I describe it is backbending is just front body elongation, but drawing energy from the bottom up, right? So we work a lot with the energetic centers and the root lock and the neck lock especially. Um, so the way you can think of it in terms of contortion terms is there's this idea of I don't know how to pronounce this word very well, tennis gritty, like the tension of the body, right? How do you pronounce it, Tanya? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, tension. So the model of body tension in the body. So if you think about those kids' toys that you can collapse and flatten and it springs back, that's basically what we're doing in back bending, only we're elongating and we're pulling everything to such extremes that the anchor points, if you think of that children's toy again, if they're slightly off, then the energy gets dissipated, it crunches into other parts of the body. So that's kind of how I think about it. So the if you think about the kids' toys, that kid's toy again, each like little nodule, each little ball, is kind of a different facet of muscular engagement, but it's not just muscles. Muscles are just part of a larger net, which is fascia, which is what we're actually working with. So when there is clogged, I could think of it as clogged energy, but if like for example the your fascia is dehydrated or things are kind of like shriveled or there's parts of your body you can't access to, it's going to affect the whole. You can kind of maneuver around it, but there's a limit to how you can maneuver around it. So that's a very nice way of just thinking of contortion. So for example, if you're doing a bridge or teardrop, teardrop's a good example where you're grabbing your ankles in a bridge basically. The entire front body is being elongated and long from the two, like from Mula bandha and also following your Jala bandha, so that you can extend, as I mentioned, the bow analogy. So if you just think about like, let's say something is not quite working in that line of energy and something is, yeah, so there's some dissipation of energy, maybe to the rib. So that's a very common issue is a bit of rib flare. So if you lose contact of your ribs and your ribs start to flare independently from the rest of your body, then the mid back will compress and leak, and that's kind of what stops you from pulling everything back in. It's kind of like you become a two people. That's kind of how I think about it. Uh, because your lower and your upper body are two separate entities and they're not talking to each other. So in contortion, a lot of the things that we do is very it's kind of combining the upper and the lower body, or we call it the upper core and the lower core as one unit. And anytime someone mispractices in terms of the quenching into any part of the joint or not being able to lock in properly, then it kind of breaks the connection between your upper and lower body. Basically everything, like most things, except maybe like leg balances and stuff, like front leg, side leg, which is more center. We the bandhas, so to speak, or these locks in the body, they help you to connect the upper and lower body. And I think that's kind of one of the main components that ties in with bandhas in yoga, because we don't really talk about it in that way. We talk about the neck lock and the pelvic lock. And so coming back, so when you're in a deep back bend and you're coming back up to neutral, the easiest ways, or even to connect and not to lose energy from the front, keeping a bit of a neck lock as you extend backwards helps you to maintain energy enough so that when you extend your neck, your head is not disconnected from the rest of your body too. So there's a lot of examples of like losing the lock makes kind of breaks your body in half, or it breaks a section of your body in half, so it becomes more fragmented.
Maybe is it possible that you, for those who don't really know contortion, just go from the side, maybe if you're able to right now, like how you would go into a camel through that action? Because
Okay,
there's
so yeah.
it's
So yeah, I
possible.
can talk about it briefly. So yeah, camels maybe that uses kind of what's frame of reference for some people. So let's say you're doing a camel and you don't want you actually, because as I said, you shouldn't actually feel your back and back bending. If you're feeling your back and back bending, there's something you're not doing. The energy is being clogged in the part of your back that you're not moving the energy upwards to the neck. So oftentimes, what very commonly I see is when people go into a camel, for example, they will either drop their skull, so the weight of their skull is weighing back, and the weight of their skull is actually hinging onto the lower back, so they cannot access their hips. So they are folding. You can have two similar pictures of the same shape, but you can kind of tell when someone's supporting their body versus someone's kind of melting into the shape. And for me, visually, like energetically, it looks like in the position in which someone's holding their energy together, you can actually see the feeling. For me, it's a kind of, this is also how I coach a lot. You can see the feeling of like the base of your energy is in the Mula Bandha and it's just is traveling upwards versus the person who's just folding. Even if they look visually the same, you can see it almost looks like they are fragmented as a person. Um, it's like sometimes I have some cues to talk about this because it looks like you are broken up as a person, like a whole person. But this is funny tying in with the loss of vital energy that you mentioned before. So the tucking, the pelvic tuck and the neck tuck connect to each other when you are lowering to the back bend so that you can control the weight of your skull. So it's the deep neck stabilizes. But the neck and the pelvis anatomically are very, very similar, right? Because they're or your lower back and your neck are very similar because they both have a kind of a neutral curve, and they're both locked from the pelvis, and the deep neck stabilizes so that we can use the more superficial muscles like your six-pack abs and here in terms of the neck, the sternocleidomastoid muscles, the more superficial muscles. But the tuck needs to happen to ground the movement before it can travel up. So the same engagement that comes from the pelvis and the six-pack ab elongation, it's the same exactly as the neck and the sternocleidomastoid muscles extending. It's only we don't have a term for this neck extension, but it's exactly the same as the abdominal extension, if that makes sense. And these are the two anchor points that help you to pull into your hips. And also, like, let's say going back to the analogy of the camel or cobra or drop back, kind of the same engagement of rooting your legs into the ground. In contortion, we always want a bit more hip extension. So we are thinking about rooting through the ground, but we're also thinking about a little bit of a spiral from the inside out to engage from your hamstrings and your hips as well to pull long from the front because we're always trying to elongate from the front. And so if you visualize it, the energy is coming up from the ground, up the pelvis, traveling up the abdominals to the neck, and the neck tuck helps to distribute the energy to the crown so that it doesn't drop. And when you come back up, you're using those tucks to pull back into neutral too.
Possible. That's what I actually meant, but I loved how we verbally explained it. But can you just like scooch a little back and show how you go down and up? Because I think if you watch it, like, is it okay for you?
Oh, you mean just like, okay, I can actually show you briefly, but not that big. I don't think people will be able to see the video.
Yeah.
But we are always starting more from the tuck here first.
Yeah.
So we're like tucking to pull in. So we actually don't want to go from the lower. So oftentimes what I see is people will just go like that. And it makes you feel very dizzy. So in terms of physiologically, it makes you feel very dizzy when you just drop your head because you're not anchored. Your body knows instinctively that you're not supposed to be dropping your upper body without any anchoring. So the anchoring from here always comes in. So that feeling of breaking the ground and a little spiral. Wait, sorry?
Can you go a little bit further back?
A little bit further. Okay, I will go here. Anyway, so sometimes some people will say like you're tucking to pull in. I find for these types of movement, it may actually make more sense to tuck to push outwards, but it's still the same tuck. So I'm still tucking to kind of spiral the hips to the corners of the room. And if I go from my pelvic tuck and my neck tuck, I can connect these two together so that I can connect. I'm not arching yet, but this and this is what's connecting as my anchors, and this is it's rooting into the ground via my legs. So when I start to extend from the lower back, I'm using the abdominal lock to tuck to elongate from here, and then from here I can extend the neck, and it feels very comfortable. I can talk to you. I can feel very grounded. Sometimes I would say like if someone punched you, you should like fall out of it because it's very solid and the energy is connected. And when you want to come back up, we're also using the neck tuck and the pelvic tuck to pull everything back into neutral. So we're working a lot with tension. Whereas oftentimes what I'll see is just people going into the position here. But then I can actually feel my lower back crunching because there's no integrity holding the body together, basically. So we work with these ideas in a very physical, practical way, pragmatic way. But also these ideas, they cannot be abandoned because they're very important for safety and contortion. So that's the other little detail I think is that very big difference between yoga and contortion is that because we are doing very extreme postures in contortion, a lot of the alignment and the energetic locks are vital to the safety of the practice of contortion because we are working on an extreme level. And this also goes back to another point of the meditative aspects of yoga and like being very mindful or looking from the outside in at what's going on in your body and creating space. You hear this a lot in yoga. These are terms and ideas that we practice very actively in contortion. But for us, it's a matter of safety as well, and it's a matter of feeling embodied in our bodies to know what to tweak to make it more less exhausting and more efficient. So that's why I think like a lot of times we, even though we don't talk about these ideas in contortion, contortionists tend to exercise these ideas. It's just I think there's something about externalizing ideas and making it a thing that sometimes people get very hooked on that and they're not looking at the big picture as well. And that's important to know that a lot of these things are not separable. They're very much interconnected. Let me just see, because I wrote some notes here. Okay, so I just wanted to mention, although this is connecting
Maybe
to
not.
some other ideas as well. So I'll just, the core Mula bandha coming from the feet. Wait, sorry, Tanya, I can't hear you.
Now I'm lagging, but before you go on, like I don't know if Tamara also has a question, but I have an immediate question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Shows that, of course, I know from the classes I took with you the tuck of both, uh, like the root and the neck lock. And but one thing that stood out to me today, I never really realized. Like I thought when you come back up, your head is last.
That's a good question, actually, Tanya, because
Yeah,
yeah.
now it's tucked while coming up, and I thought you're supposed to let it come up and then take it in. How is it for you,
So there
Tamara?
is a good, that's a good question, Tanya, because it depends on what you're doing. So if I'm doing something that's very, very difficult to balance, and I don't have the core engagement, I'll use the tuck to come back up. But technically, you don't have to, because once this is locked in, technically we draw from the bottom up. This is it's kind of like seatback going from here and then shifting into your second position versus going from here and then coming up. So these are two, I would say like not understanding how these locks work first is always important. And then you can play with the form because once you understand what's holding your skull, then it wouldn't really matter because if we're coming back up the second way, we're still keeping the energy coming back up. So I would say like the what I demonstrated earlier, it's more of like when you're trying to understand how these locks work in the body. And they can be accessed when you're in a position where you feel you cannot use your abdominals as well. But going from a C back to a second position, which is like so in contortion terms, it's like when you stick your butt out and you bring your head to your butt and then you shift to your drop back position. Uh, we are still containing the energy, just in a very different way. So instead of pushing, like tucking to push out the hips, we are tucking to suck in the hips. And there's a very gradual progression where you are going from hip flexion to extension. But the Mula Bandha is important in the hip flexion to pike properly, so you're not crunching from your lower back. And there's a gradual shift towards hip extension, but the lock is still holding on to this, but to extend the hips. So it's a bit more subtle and it's a bit more complex. That's kind of why, like, when I teach things, I always try to make sure people have the fundamental concepts first, and then after that, they can bring these concepts to other things without physically doing it. Because at the end of the day, it's not so much about, like in your chest stand, you would still be tucking your neck, but you would not be visibly tucking your neck. Your neck would be like here. So sometimes the neck tuck is something as simple as just going like this. So a lot, it may not always be visual, basically. Okay, yeah, I think that, yeah, does that make sense actually, Tanya?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of other things to mention here because I think I covered everything, but I just wanted to make a connection to anchoring into the ground. So like when you are doing one thing that I've noticed for cueing generally in contortion is that if you in a cobra, drop back, anything standing, camel, if you cue anchoring into the ground and feeling the energy from the ground coming up to your pelvis, which is returning of prana energy, which I think is very interesting. Um, that is usually how I cue it because one thing I noticed is that this is actually a thing for yoga too that I think gets miscued or is people isolate Mula bandha as a single thing, but it always has to come from the bottom up, from the ground up to your pelvis rather than just locking in. Because if you're just locking in again, it's like disconnected from the rest of the body if you just lock in. That's why people tend to clench their pelvic floor or like this is something I see a lot in contortion when people cue only the pelvic lock. People tend to over clench. But if I think about it, like, oh, notice in a lunge that your entire leg's pushing into the ground and it's pulling the energy up to your pelvis, people have a tendency to engage the right muscles in the right degree without overthinking. So that holistic cueing is a bit more practical in terms of achieving things as well. Because in the end, it's if people over squeeze their pelvic floor muscles, they also tend to over squeeze their glutes and other things that over squeeze when in reality it's a holistic engagement in which all the I call it the back line is working together supported by the front line and it's a series of muscles, a pattern, complex patterning of muscles. It's not discrete muscles. But this is something that is an issue in I think in generally in modern mindsets, it's just fragmenting things into a very Descartesian way when you can't do that if you want to advance in your discipline, basically. The best practitioners or the best artists are the ones who can intuitively feel through their bodies and have a very smart way of sensing what is needed in a posture versus saying I have to engage this and this and this. It's a very, I think, in my opinion, it's a very outdated way of looking at movement. Yeah. Okay.
Tamara, do you have any inputs or questions?
No, just that Ami reminded me of that the pelvic lock, the Mula bandha is not just the pelvic floor or anus squeezing or lifting or engaging, but that overall area of the pelvic and abs basically working together to create that upward lift and support the shoulder extension or whatever it is you do. So it's not just reduced to only the pelvic floor. It's...
And actually, if it's okay for both of you, I would like to kind of go into the segment of the anatomy and all that stuff because I do feel a lot of the points that have been touched on are kind of interesting to look at now with this. So the first thing of Mula Bandha not being just a root lock.
Not just the pelvic.
Sorry, not just the pelvic floor. Yeah, sorry. Not just the pelvic floor. We do know that whenever we engage the pelvic floor, usually if your body is responding regularly, you have an automatic or like a reflexive contraction of parts of your transverse abs, which is the deepest layer of your abs that sits kind of like a corset around, like your ribs all the way around and then your pelvis all the way around. So when you engage pelvic floor, you usually automatically, if you want to try it or if listeners want to try it, if it works well together and it's quite developed, if you put your fingers on your skin between the hip bones and just squeeze your pelvic floor, you will automatically have a tiny feeling of your deep abs. Like there's some tension coming up. It's not like a hardcore contraction that you can do voluntarily, but it will go into, it's connected. So it just kind of feel to me too that the Mula Bandha is, let me just get my skeleton. my God, I can't move it, so I will move the laptop. Basically, for me, the pelvic floor, obviously, it sits inside of here. So it's like a bowl of the pelvis. It sits at the bottom, and then the transverse abs, they cross here and around here. And when you lift that, it usually kind of does some action here in your lower belly area too. And I've been thinking about that a lot recently during practice because I do have issues with back bending ever since I had an injury in, I think it was 2022. My body is just, or my nervous system is scared of back bends. It feels like a threat. So for all these years, I've been trying to figure out how can I work on back bends and it feeling safe and not crunching anything and all that stuff. And it's actually a very new thing that I've started to experiment with only like a week ago, but it has changed my life and it really fits into this topic that Mula bandha is not just the pelvic floor. Is when we learn in physiotherapy for like pelvic floor rehab, and we learned this cue to access your lower belly. There's many different cues, but one of them is imagine that you're pulling these 2 points towards each other. So not only this area going in, but you imagine really, really hard that this moves that way as you pull it in. And what happens then, if you get a contraction in the front and you think of pulling together and not only in, it actually gives an input onto your pelvis where this isn't moving, but I'm trying to. So basically, the iliac bones, if these are the iliac bones, and this is the front that I was just talking about, I'm overdoing the movement now, but if you have that contraction, it goes like this. So it's a very tiny movement in real life, but it does actually decompress the lower back, where most people tend to over crunch into. So this has been a very, very huge thing. Just applying it 1 week, it has the kind of, how can I say, it has made back bends be way less of a nervous system threat, and actually they start feeling supported again. Because before I was only about pelvic floor up, belly in, and like kind of trying to lift the energy line up, but I never connected to these two going also
That's
here.
the black hole cue, actually, Tanya. Like I always cue the two hip bones sucking into the center like a black hole, but the black hole can push outwards as well. So
Yeah,
that it troubles me that like people don't catch on to that actually, because it's the vital thing of like drawing. It feels like you're sucking in energy from your two hip. I kind of call it like the two hip bones are two um generators, like in like generating energy to the center, and then it sucks in the energy to go up. Yeah.
that's the use cues, and that's actually a whole different podcast. But we can use cues and we can really try our best to have people understand. But
Yeah.
for me, my brain, the black hole cue was kind of just a general everything like going, to the center. But I needed that super, like really, I guess,
Anatomical.
kind of almost dumbing down of just think about two arrows of your hip bones doing this. And it's like going
Because that
together.
can also go wrong if you do it superficially.
Exactly. So you need to do this and then pull it
Yeah.
behind. So that's kind of so that really made me this week, of course, in preparation for for this podcast, I was like, oh my God, yeah, it's really like I need to root
Yeah.
more through that. And it's really cool that today, actually, Tamara, you said that it has been discussed in some texts that Mula bandha is also lower belly and not just the pelvic floor. So going a little bit back to like just the general anatomy for also people to understand, if we think about the pelvic floor and the transverse abs and the diaphragm and everything, you can think of basically transverse abs, like I said, like a corset, and it has a lid and it has a bottom. And basically, when you're in an exhaled state, your diaphragm goes up and into your rib cage, and your pelvic floor is lifted. When you inhale, your diaphragm contracts downwards, and the pelvic floor actually relaxes also a little bit downward. So exhaling, everything goes up. Inhaling, everything goes down. And then when you do that in daily life, like when you're just breathing, that's just a natural thing that's happening. And then there's this discussion, which I'm very curious about, is how would you apply bandha in a physical sense during your training or like your asana, where you're actually doing pretty insane stuff. Like, let's be honest, even Ashtanga Yoga is kind of a form of contortion for some asanas, for sure. It's not that everybody has to practice Ashtanga Yoga that way, but if you do like the full expression of the pose, some of them are literally contortion. So,
Yeah.
and then there's this thing where people are saying like, oh no, your pelvic floor and your abs, you should never engage them consciously. You should just let your body do its thing and have them engage reflexively, which to a certain point I agree, because there's a bunch of people who used to have, back injury, like a herniated disc, and then they are like in daily life just reaching for something off the floor. They're just like, engaging everything, and it's very unnatural or like robotic, and that actually can lead to unnecessary pain or tension patterns resulting from your fear of moving. So you kind of have to restore people's trust in that their ab muscles and their pelvic floor will naturally at the correct point do the correct amount of engagement, which is a very important thing. But I think if we take it to these extremes, so very deep back bending, very deep front bending, lifting your body up into space, doing a handstand where you're back bending or something, there is a certain amount of engagement that you do need, but you don't need it constantly, and it shouldn't be a static amount of engagement. So that's how I understand it at the moment in time. And, like my thinking about bandhas, it has started probably in 2012. So it's kind of always evolving. But I want to just give you a bit of an example from what I spoke about before, where I feel like an over squeezing, like a constant squeezing of bandha can deplete you and actually cause you trouble, versus how you could maybe utilize it in practice, is this concept. It also comes from pelvic floor rehab, where when your pelvic floor is weak or for some other reason, it's like over engaged or like tense. So for example, also if you're very lax, hypermobility or something like that, and your pelvic floor as a compensation is like constantly contracted, trying to stabilize your body, that puts it in a state where it's always kind of tired and always already contracted, and it will not be able to help you in a reflexive way in the correct time with the correct amount of strength. So there's this concept of, even if you want to like train your muscles to squeeze stronger, you need to also have them relax. So it's like a duality thing. Of course, everything is one, but also there's always a lot of stuff that needs one thing and the opposite to work together. So we do need engagement, but we also need full relaxation of the pelvic floor. And that is actually a pretty tough thing for some people to achieve. So the way I've been applying it during my asana practice, or even when I train flexibility or contortion, is that first of all, I am trying to, in the deep ranges, I'm trying to get, these engagements, the black hole, a little bit maybe of a lift of the pelvic floor, but I mostly think about the black hole in the front, low abs. So I get a bit of engagement, and I try, every time I go out of an extreme range, I try to at the right point, let it go. And then I even practice to actually breathe into my, it sounds really stupid, into my butt. Because this has been another very vital, quite new cue for relaxing the pelvic floor. So I don't know if you've ever had issues with that, but for example, when people were instructing me to relax my pelvic floor, what happened was I was kind of spilling out too much, like into the lower belly and like into the front of the like groin area. It kind of felt like kind of weird, like not comfortable to relax. It wasn't really relaxation. And then when I heard this cue that you can try to inhale into your butt, I didn't know what was going to happen to me. But basically, when I did that, I realized I'm for the first time relaxing my pelvic floor properly. And I just want to show you again on the skeleton what that is doing for me. So when I'm inhaling into the butt, that basically means it feels as if the space between the sit bones was widening to the outwards way, and as if the sacrum was kind of doing this. I'm overdoing the movement, obviously, but basically the sit bones spread apart and the sacrum lifts on my inhales. And this is just one thing that I do feel a bunch of people actually have a lot of tightness and compression here in this area, especially also people I think who have injured their hamstring attachments at the sit bones. Often the whole area like gets fascially very tight and kind of scared of opening. So even if that injury has been rehabbed, there's usually like a lag of tightness and strange sensations in your pelvic floor. And through that cue of inhaling into your butt, that is very like, helping to release. So as a concrete example, for me is like when I do, for example, Kapotasana, which is a huge struggle, I'm often not even going down because I still have this history of my body overreacting to it. But usually what I do is after that, I just lay into child's pose and literally completely let go of all bandha and inhale into my butt 5 times. And this is kind of working on that duality between engaging things and then also letting them fully go. So you can with more ease access the bandhas again when you need them. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like the main point that I wanted to make today. First of all, explain a little bit the relation, plus also that when you use them, don't use them as like a static thing that stays the same the whole time, but it's kind of like dynamic. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a
yeah,
very
yeah.
hypermobile thing, just so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
oh, it's a very hypermobile thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But also there's so many humans on this planet with pelvic floors that are not hypermobile, but maybe gave birth 1 or 2 times and they have issues. So basically that's kind of also addressing those people. And a lot of people with that high hamstring tendinopathy also, like I have a few people who came, and one of the most amazing things for them to try was to literally sit and put, one of those small black roll balls between their anus and also in between the anus and the sit bone and just stay there and relax. So I think if some people have issues with accessing their bandhas, maybe it's because they have a chronic state of compression and contraction in that area.
So it's kind of that uh, reworking of the medieval description of sitting on the hill. Is sitting on a ball or some kind of the roll towel to just mechanically stimulate this area to give that mechanical feedback through the touch, right?
That's actually makes me think about that. But yeah, it's kind of like you replacing the heel. And
Yeah,
but
because
yeah, sorry, just for the way I did it, I actually haven't tried putting it exactly under my anus. I just put it like slightly next to it, but
Yeah.
we should try to sit on a ball like that.
Yeah, no, I mean the exact location by millimeters, I think, is fluctuating. It's all those areas are very close, so you can't really isolate the perineum and uh, the anal area is like it's very close. So and the foot is bigger than, than this area, so you're gonna press on both, right? But it's interesting that they actually, well, like coming back to the Ashtanga context, like the context of the practice of this the sequence as we do it in Ashtanga. Um, that exact description of Mula Bandha we actually have only in one position, which is the Janushasana B, which is basically looks like the Mahamudra, that technique that was also described together with bandhas. So visually, it's exactly the same, right? You sit on your foot, you press the foot, the heel into perineum or your rectum, and then you hold your foot. The difference, I think, is that you're supposed to hold it for Mahamudra, the Jalandhara bandha, and also there is kind of mental focus on that subtle energy rising, and you're staying much longer, not just 5 breath cycles as well. So I find it interesting that we have this position that is actually giving the mechanical stimulation of the area of the Mula Bandha, of the pelvic floor, along with actually with one more position, which is the next one, the Janushasana C. If you're lucky, you want to have that flexibility of the hip and ankle to position the foot in a way that when you fold, you have the heel pressing into your lower abdomen, is also quite an interesting feeling because it's also kind of mechanically pressing into your lower abs, the heel, and I do it in a way that I'm actually positioning the foot in a way that allows for this pressure because intuitively it feels like the correct way to do, and well actually it's described like it's supposed to be done this way. So the heel is pressing into your lower abs, which is another point for Mula Bandha. And yeah, and that's it. It's then we don't have that many other positions that would mechanically put the pressure into the area of Mula Bandha. Maybe only the quite a strange position in the advanced series, the Virinchasana, where your foot is turned back and you sit on your heel as well. But I mean that's quite uh, it's a difficult position and few people do it anyway. So, but that Janu B is quite okay.
Actually, there's one thing that I forgot to say about the anatomy thing, but yeah, I love that you brought up the two asanas where you're pressing the exact area. But one
Mhm.
I I forgot to say, and I really wanted to because you explained the concept of Apana and Prana in the beginning, is like on a mere physical level, as we age, we literally have this Apana energy happening in our body. So basically, what I mean by that is if we don't really work, especially as born female people, if we don't really work on, having sort of a lifting thing or like a muscular engagement from the bottom up. And also another thing, if we never go upside down, just living and existing, gravity is eventually kind of dragging on our physical organs, like even like when we get older or like lose muscle tone, it can happen that everything kind of like drops literally in your body. So that's just, I wanted to mention that, like, it's something I've also, I actually don't really know if there's real medical data on that, if somebody ever measured how much organs drop on average in a human's body throughout their lifespan. But just like from working as a physio and having also seen a lot of old and very sick people who are very deconditioned and their abs are not containing anything, like everything is spilling out. You can really see like your insides do lower. They're just pulled by gravity down. So on that mere physical level, you kind of do need this practice in your life if you want to contain, kind of the energy and force into the center of your body. So that was just one last thing I wanted to share. It's an observation of mine that on a mere physical level, Apana is kind of like gravity working on us as we age. So that was
Yeah. So that probably that recommendation to do Mula Bandha in Shirshasana that Krishnamacharya suggested. I mean, it makes sense because you then invert yourself and the pelvic floor kind of goes up.
Didn't Patabi Choice actually say to not do it in
Not that I know of, no.
I'm gonna
But
grab
the Patabi Krishnamacharya definitely suggested. But the you mean in Yoga Mala? No, that I know, I didn't see. I think that he mentioned another inversion where he was saying not to engage, I think, Mula. But I don't remember which one. But I don't think it was Shashasana. I think it was in something in the shoulder stand or Urdhva Padmasana or something like that.
Maybe
I don't exactly remember.
I will look it up, but maybe Amy, you have some inputs to keep the chat going, and I will just check here in the book.
Quick side note, I did look it up, but I did forget to even put it into the conversation. So just inputting it here, I did have it wrong in my memory. In the Yoga Mala book, it's actually said to utilize both Mula and Uddiyana Bandha strongly in Shirshasana. But for Prasarita Padottanasana, ABCD, it says to somewhat lighten Mula, so not fully, but it's almost released, but still use Uddiyana.
Oh, you are you're mute.
I don't have a lot to say, but it's that the overtension of the pelvis is an issue for some people, but in my population, it's mostly the hypermobile people who tend to overclench their pelvic floor. But one thing I've also noticed is this general tendency in people to isolate individual cues like separate from the rest of the body. So another thing that people tend to do is like squeeze their butts too much or clench their butts in cobra or whatever. So in yoga, oftentimes the cue is to relax your butt, and then in contortion they say squeeze your butt, but in reality it's somewhere between the two. If that if that makes sense. Like you're anchoring from your leg, so your butt is squeezing, but if you over clench it, it will actually put pressure on the lower back and it actually hurts. So it's always in conjunction with other cues. So I thought the hypertonic pelvic floor issue or that feeling of like you want to pee when you are training is also it's not normal or ideal. And I think that comes from people I think generally people not knowing how to use their pelvic floor, but I also see this so in the hypermobile people and also in those who gave birth in the past, that's always something I'll see is the pelvic floor engagement is not turning on in the right way. So what it looks like for me physically, it's kind of like softness in the pelvis. and in contortion, oftentimes we use this term softness to denote what we don't want to see. So for example, if Sushma would say, oh, your neck is very soft, it means that you're just dropping your head, or your pelvis is very soft, it means that you're not drawing energy. And so there's this, maybe this is a nice analogy, is in terms of engagement, is always trying to draw energy into a firmness so that you can draw from it. Because if the energy is completely dissipated when you're doing positions, this is the same. And going, I mean, same issue is going to happen. But then also going back to breathing. So obviously, like doing very deep breathing, and this is something I've been telling my students, doing deep breathing and knowing how to engage and relax outside of contortion practice is very important for bringing it back to contortion practice. The one thing I often see is people are not able to diaphragmatic breathe in their daily life properly. The most common thing I will see is the ribs start to flare because they are unable to pull in the energy from their abdominal lock. And when that happens, we have to just go back to breathing. And the way we do it in contortion is a little bit different to create more space in the rib cage, is you can kind of you use your inhale to relax, but you can use your exhale to pull the ribs open, if that makes sense. So like if you you inhale, inflate your rib cage, and your exhale to pull the energy from the bottom up, from the transverse abs traveling upwards. And this is it's actually quite a nice way to open the rib cage so it's not flaring as you inhale, and then you exhale, and you're kind of pushing out against your hand, with pushing into the back of your hand from the back of your ribs to create more space. But going back to Tanya's point about chest breathing versus diaphragmatic breathing. So diaphragmatic breathing is usually this is what we should be doing in daily life. And in yoga, I think also I'm not sure how you actually utilize different types of breathing in terms of deep versus chest breathing, but for contortion, we cannot deep breathe in many postures. So a lot of the breath is very shallow from the chest. But so the way we utilize breathing is in a very oppositional way to how it's usually done, meaning we usually inhale to kind of pull to tuck in, and then we exhale to pull longer. So it's the opposite of diaphragmatic breathing in a way, because in diaphragmatic breathing, you're inhaling to extend, and then the rib cage, and then you're exhaling to kind of pull the energy upwards. And then contortion is kind of the same, but in the opposite way. So bit interesting segue, I guess.
Well, in Ashtanga, if you keeping your lower abdominals in a low tone engagement throughout as you move to control the movement, right, and to move from one asana to another, basically you don't really, depends what you mean by diaphragmatic breath. If it's like the belly breath, certainly we don't breathe into the belly in Ashtanga. It's not like it's chest is passive and the belly is moving. No, it's most of the time, I think it's in a way similar to the contortion way, that you keep containing the abdominal wall, you inhale, you expand the rib cage. It's just that we need to keep in mind that we're not talking only about the back bends, right? We have many other movements, the twists, the forward folds as well, the inversions, while also the transitional movements. But the breath is usually coached in Ashtanga as the three-dimensional expansion of the rib cage. So you're utilizing your bandhas, Mula, Uddiyana, to keep the abdominal wall contained, and you're using the intercostals muscles between your ribs and the diaphragm to create the upward and sideways expansion.
Okay, that's kind of.
And when you exhale, for example, depends on the position you do, you can utilize it differently. Like in some positions, you simply cannot breathe like that, or there is no need to breathe like that. For backbends, yes. For twists maybe as well, but for forward folds, there is no need to breathe like that, for example. So it changes the breath patterns, and how you utilize the breathing muscles changes within the Ashtanga sequence.
Yeah, I actually think, thank you so much, Amy, for bringing the discussion to the breath. And Tamara, I agree with you. Like, it kind of changes depending on the asana. So I'm just going to lay down quickly how I understand to use the bandhas and the breath in the different types. But we spoke about backbending already. It's kind of like you draw in but elongate at the same time, and you also use your intercostals and you use your bandhas to kind of support everything. Then for front bending, it's actually kind of fun. There's a lot of front bends where you're actually standing and folding over. And then also seated, you try to achieve a similar thing, but it doesn't feel the same. But I love, so basically I could fold down, just letting my belly be super soft. And then you can actually see it. Oh, let me turn on the lights. So you can actually kind of see my belly is like sloppy and soft hanging out. But what I do in forward bending is it's almost like a vacuum, like my belly vanishes.
Yeah, like
Yeah, we
like
do that for
Uddiyana, where it's
compression.
like that.
We do that for compression as well. So it's that tiny black hole to pull, but it's coming from here. And also for presses as well. So handstand presses, that suction in is very important.
That suction actually feels extremely light. It doesn't feel.
Yes.
No, it doesn't feel heavy at all. No.
It's really just like sucking in and it's gone. And it allows you to go, down.
But when we do straddle press, it shouldn't be a big engagement. You just literally pull in and up. So it doesn't feel for me like when I'm doing a press.
For
So
presses, yeah.
yeah, I'm not like engaging. I'm just pulling in to lift it up. So it's not a big engagement. Same as straddle press. It just feels like a lifting. So I think that's the ideal, but most of the time people over squeeze everything.
Exactly.
Do you feel like for this kind of suction to occur, that with light suction of the belly in the forward fold, the pretty deep forward fold needs to be there, because if the person is tight at the back of the legs, even if they bend the knees, it's just the position of the trunk is not quite the same. So you need to be more upside down with your rib cage for that suction. So your belly falls down or up towards under the ribs. Because if you're a stiffer person and can't really in this position, this suction doesn't happen.
It's not happening. And also it's because they're so stiff, they're using their abdominals to pull forward.
Yeah.
Okay, like it's a transitional state. And eventually they can arrive at a state where the folding is enough. So you can just like suck it in. And then also for those who can already achieve that, at least that's the way how I do it. When I inhale, this area, I imagine that it's kind of like I inhale and I get some length and a little bit of opening.
Exactly, yeah.
I can drop deep. So I'm constantly I'm gaining space with my ribs in relation to where they are on the thigh through each breath. So that's how I use it in like that upside down, and I think that's apparently what all of us do. And then when it's sitting, it's the same thing. If somebody is stiff, it's not going to happen. So sometimes it can actually be helpful to elevate people's butt. But I'm going to usually try to like inhale, lengthen, exhale, fold. Inhale, lengthen, exhale, fold. It's just much harder when you're that way in relation to gravity. And then when it comes to twists, I have found, and that's actually very funny. So Slava came to my store this year for the first time, and he like dove into trying Ashtanga yoga for 3 weeks. And one of the first comments he made is like, "This is pretty intense on the pelvic floor." And he didn't mean engaging the pelvic floor. He meant like because he's quite muscular and he has a bunch of flexibility, but mostly in his lower body. His spine towards twisting and extending is quite restricted through so much muscle mass. So for him, doing twists was so hardcore. He had barely any space to breathe. So where can it go? It can go down.
Pressure went down. Okay.
And I was like, oh, thank you for saying that, because of of course I'm more like a naturally flexible person. So I never had the exact same struggle in twisting, but I know what he means. So when I twist, and I think it's a common experience, when you twist, you kind of don't really know where to go with your breath. So the way I apply it is when I do twists, I actually, that time is where I really squeeze my Mula bandha, meaning pelvic floor and lower abs. I really want to keep them in, and I literally only want to breathe into my back and maybe a little bit. So if we have a twist going that way, I want to kind of lift here into here and into the back.
Okay.
But
It's
holding,
kind of similar to how we do backbend and contortion, because if you just go from here, you're always trying to suck from the bottom up to lift. So it's that feeling of like sucking from the bottom to side bend versus just going like that, if that makes sense. So we
For
also
the
use
twist in the backbend?
yeah, I mean, for like contortion twisting, we're always twisting on the lateral. We're always going like this and then like this. So like if you wanted to flip the grip, you would have to, if you just go like this, it's gonna hurt. You need to have to lift to get your
Okay, so it's like a backbendy twist.
yeah,
it's on the yeah, but people generally tend to twist only from their QLs or very superficially when it has to come from the rib cage lifting. Yeah.
yeah. So basically, you would agree that some part of the breath tries to go into
Yeah.
this, and the rest tries to go into your mid and upper back, kind of.
Yeah, so it's kind of it has to basically you still need to kind of have to use the root but the root lock to pull the energy up to expect any kind of twist is always happening in two platforms. Like one area is contracting actively and the other is extending actively. So it also helps to think about the extension and breathing into that as well. Because if you just passively twist it also and you don't pay attention to the extension, it may not feel very good.
Cool. So, Amy, I just saw that you wrote in the
Yeah.
chat, but I'm very happy because I do feel that we kind of covered
We
what
kind
we
of cover everything, yeah.
covered. And I think all of us could take away some new concepts today, and then we can kind of play with what we talked about in our own exploration of our practices. And yeah, for me, like as a final note, so I think all of us can just say one final note, but my final note was, oh my God, I loved it. And I love that we actually had a bit of sometimes almost contradictory things, like la la, la having to, not just everybody, yeah, I agree, everything exactly the same. So it was really like a discussion. I love that. And I do love that I learned today that Krishnamacharya said with period pain, you're supposed to apparently contract your bandhas, which goes so against everything that I was originally taught. Like, don't practice when you're on your period, and especially don't contract your bandhas. You're like reversing the flow or whatever, which is not happening because you have gravity and contractions of your uterus the rest of the time of the day where it's just going to flow. So
I mean, and then you can try it, and then if you see the result. If it doesn't feel good, you don't do it. If it helps you with the menstrual cramp, oh, good. It's easy to check experientially, right? And I guess for everyone is different. Everyone's period is different, so.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I do like to practice from the second day onward. I don't like the first day or the few days just before. So I think everybody should just explore this new input and see how they feel and then just do what's best. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to have your final note, Amy, and then Tamara, in case Amy has to run.
I guess just a little note about menstrual periods, I guess, is that I actually find I feel the best once my period starts and onwards. Sometimes there's a delay, but usually once progesterone drops, then I start to feel good right from the first day. So I never really understood like don't practice during your period. I would say if you had to choose, don't practice before your period in the few days, because that's usually when things are a bit inflamed and sensitive, and you're more likely to feel pain in your lower back and your pelvis. And then usually once estrogen drops, sometimes there's a delay, like an overlap. Anyway, so yeah, I think it was an interesting discussion because there were many. Oh, I think like Tamara disappeared. Many overlaps between a lot of the things that we say. I think the main little thing that I was thinking of, like an overarching thing, is just I let Tamara come back in.
Yeah.
A lot of the things in yoga are more formalized, and I think sometimes people, I see this in some yogis, is that they get caught up in the formalization of the thing. But in a lot of other disciplines, I think it happens organically or more holistically, but it's also very helpful for practitioners of circus to think about these ideas because it has been formalized. So there's this two kind of like very different ways of thinking, but we can both learn from each other. Like firstly, just not separating too much the spiritual to physical and knowing it's all at once, but also knowing that there is an element of energetic connection and spirituality, or these ideas do apply to contortion regardless. This is actually something I was writing about, regardless of how people want to dismiss it. Because there is something that you're going to experience regardless if you do contortion. It's just whether you have the language for it or not, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Hey,
And
Tamara.
Tamara.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped out for a second. My battery died. Yeah, that the what Amy said, the final thoughts about we shouldn't. It's not necessary to really divide the practice as purely physical or purely spiritual. I'm not sure you can really do it, and uh, after all, it depends on your intention. If you want your practice to be spiritual, it's going to be spiritual. No matter what you do, you can run, you can lift weights, depending on really what your intention and your higher goal is. Um, at the same time, like I think we should understand certain techniques, such as bandha that we discussed today, um, within the context they originated, that historical and cultural context they originated, and we should like respect that and just be mindful of the fact that we are actually reframing them, those techniques we are reframing, we are reinterpreting them to fit into the practice that we are doing right now, so they make sense. And knowing the roots where it's coming from, I think is important. It's especially if we practice yoga and we call it and we use all this terminology, we should know where it's coming from
Thank you
and
so
the
much.
original purpose. Yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, Amy, you have to
Yeah,
go.
I'm gonna end the recording here.
As you can hear, the episode ended quite abruptly because we really didn't think we'd be speaking to each other for 2 hours, and it was time for Amy to teach. And I just want to mention this is pretty cool that we managed to even do it in the first place because Amy is based in Montreal, Canada. I am based in Basel, Switzerland, and Tamara is based in Bangkok, Thailand. So, with the time zones and our routines, it meant that Amy had to get up earlier than she usually would, and Tamara had to actually stay up later than she usually would. So, it was 9 p.m. for her when we started, and we spoke for 2 hours. If you're an Ashtangi who practices in the morning, you can imagine what that means. So, thank you very much to both of them for joining and sharing their knowledge. And just listening back to this as I was editing, I have to say it was quite cool how the flow went, the many aspects and perspectives that we put into it. And I really hope that for you, the listener, there were things that were new for you or that changed the way you think about the use of bandhas or that opened your mind to the other practice that you're not doing. So if you're a contortionist, maybe you are now more curious about bandhas or like the history of them or what it is that people do in Ashtanga yoga and vice versa. Ashtangis can maybe open their mind to see that contortion is not really just a physical thing where you're just trying to do the most extreme thing imaginable, but that it also has a history and a tradition, and that it can also work on more subtle energetic levels, and that we do actually find the parallels of, I know from many Ashtangis that I spoke to, that they feel like it induces a kind of drug-like state, and that we actually have this parallel in contortion too, because we are manipulating our nervous system so much. We are working with our beings as a whole, and we are very in a single-minded state of focus when we do these practices. So that is doing something to us, no matter if we go into it with intentions and concepts and knowledge that we spoke about today, or if we're just exploring it and kind of going without having these thoughts and systems and ideas in an articulated manner in our brains as we do the practices. So please, if you have things that you want to share with us, questions, or things that you actually want to elaborate on, let us know in the comments. And if you like this episode, we also forgot that part, please like the video. If you feel like subscribing to the channel, you can, even though you might see that I'm not utilizing this YouTube channel quite a lot, at least in the past, but I will be uploading future podcast episodes on here. And yeah, maybe you're interested in that. So also please check out Amy and Tamara, and have a good rest of your day, whatever you're doing and wherever you are.